It's time to talk to a real scientist about this substation issue. Hello and welcome to a Cohn Zone exclusive. This is Dr. Alex Cohn, who is a molecular biologist. She got a PhD from Princeton, and she's a 49ers fan, and she's going to be explaining what's going on with this this electrical substation. As you can see, I don't know what's going on. But before we get started, and before I introduce Dr. Alexis, the owner of the team, Jed York, God love him, spoke about this issue today on Radio Row at the Super Bowl, unprompted. So why don't we listen to what he had to say, and then we'll get Dr. Alexis's take. Here we go. Take it away, Jed.
But the substation, right? Like that people are talking about injuries.
Yeah.
That's been there since 1987.
Oh, we're going there, Jed? Okay.
That's been there since 1987. Jerry Rice was there.
Yeah.
It didn't seem to affect Jerry Rice. It seems like Jerry Rice can still play today. I don't believe that that's something that is a real
everyone's
issue.
being asked about it.
I am sure.
Lynch, I'm sure. Fred Warner was asked about it yesterday. Is there like due diligence being done? Have you researched it, or is it?
We'll look into it, but we've been there since 1987 next to the substation, and this is the first time that somebody has brought it up. It's not like it happened last season. Jerry Rice seemed to be pretty healthy during his career. Like all those guys seem to be pretty healthy during their career. I think we can debunk it.
It's too pragmatic, Jed.
Yeah.
This like critical thinking.
Can't do that.
Well, but then it begs the question, what do we do? What's the next step on it? John Lynch said it yesterday. Your amazing GM said we have to, what did he say? We have to have a plan, like the next few steps. We have what are the next things to check off the list of like why this, I mean what I said, Jed. You're healthy, you're in the Super Bowl. You're not. This team specifically.
Did you say that specifically to John?
No, I didn't see John.
You should. All right.
But you know what I mean?
No,
the injuries, it's like the most frustrating,
it's unbelievably frustrating. And we need to be better at it.
But what is it?
If I knew, I would wave my magic wand and I would fix it. We need to fix it. We need to make sure that we are healthy. We need to make sure that we are best able to compete. Because you said it, when we're healthy, we're in the Super Bowl.
All right. Well, it's nothing to worry about, according to the owner of the team, who clearly doesn't have a conflict of interest. Dr. Alexis, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? What do you do? What have you studied? And why does this story interest you?
Hi, yeah, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Like you mentioned, I did my PhD at Princeton in molecular biology in one of the top metabolic research labs in the world. After graduating, I started a business doing one-on-one work and teaching people. And ultimately, somewhere along the line, I ended up doing a postdoc at UPenn for a year and fell down this light biology rabbit hole and started studying light and quantum biology, basically spending all my free time understanding the history of the research, open questions, where we need to go, what people need to know to improve their lives and their health and their performance, et cetera. So now I work with professional athletes across the board, different sports, people looking to, improve their health who are disenfranchised with the standard medical approach. I educate lay people, I educate doctors. So got my hands on a lot of things, but the issue of EMFs and EMF research is one that's particularly close to my heart because studying the history of how this research was conducted and the findings that were had and how they were swept under the rug, it literally goes back 70 years. So if we go back to the research of Dr. Robert O. Becker, he wrote the book Cross Currents, which I have right here. We're reading in my book club. He also wrote the book called The Body Electric. Both two incredible books for people who are interested in this topic and want to learn more. But obviously, we're going to get into some of that science today as well. But he was an MD, a very esteemed researcher, trying to understand the effects of, at the time in the 50s, we didn't really have a lot of radio frequency technologies. There was, some radar and actual like radio, but we didn't have the 4G, 5G, LTE, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, all of that. And we're going to talk about that. So at the time, his research was primarily focused on the effects of non-native magnetic and electric fields and radar to a certain extent as well from military technology. And he, was very prolific. So there's a lot of research on this topic stemming back between the 50s and the 70s when his lab was active, alongside another researcher by the name of Dr. Alan Fry, who also did work on the EMF space. And both of them are like kind of the godfathers of this field. The problem and like kind of the heartbreaking aspect to this story is that Becker, in all of his integrity, he ended up studying the effects of non-native fields from a military antenna that was going to go up in the Midwest in the 70s. And he kind of went into it open-minded and ended up finding out that there were severe health consequences to the frequencies being used in that technology. And he ended up blowing the whistle on this technology on the nighttime talk show 60 Minutes in 1977. And within a few days, all of the funding from his lab was pulled and his career was destroyed. And so he was one of the first canceled scientists, and this was in the 1970s. And the research that he had been submitting to the Naval Archive, he went back and checked essentially, and none of it had been actually published and put through because this data was highly inconvenient to the narrative that was supporting the rollout of this technology that was so good for the military-industrial complex, but not necessarily for the health of the people in the vicinity of this antenna. And the antenna, after some controversy, did end up going up. It was decommissioned in the early 2000s. But needless to say, we've kind of been on this freight train rolling through without brakes on the EMF, on the topic of EMFs and the issue of EMFs ever since the mid 1900s, and honestly goes back to even the early 1900s when we see, late 1800s creation of the light bulb. We see Tesla's AC power grid rolled out in the early 1900s. We see radio. We see basically just the technologization of our world, and essentially somewhat of kind of a denial state, because there is this interest and desire to push this technology that benefits us in a lot of ways. But at the same time, we have to be able to be honest about the potential drawbacks as well. Not only just to say, okay, don't use this technology. That's not really the point. The point is, if we're honest about the drawbacks and the harms of this tech, then we can get creative and build better tech that minimizes these kind of off-target harms that are not really benefiting anybody, and in fact are destroying health at a very fundamental level. And we can talk about obviously the mechanisms and the issues with all different types of EMFs. I mean, everything from radio frequencies, like I said, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, 5G, 4G, LTE, etc. We can talk about the magnetic fields and the electric fields from things like the AC power grid. We can talk about things like, military radar. ELFs are a really important topic that we're going to touch on as well, because that's directly related to the magnetic field component of something like a substation. So that's kind of like the brief introduction. My interest, Becker ended up dying in 2008, kind of bitter, and never got to see his work come to fruition. So part of my life's and work's goal is to shed light on his work and help to push this field further and just bring awareness to this really important topic.
Okay. So for people who don't understand, there is a theory. I mean, the Niners have essentially been one of the most injured teams in the league, if not the most injured team in the league, every year since 2013, with the exception of 1 or 2 years. And they haven't been able to figure out why. And the theory out now is that somehow this electrical substation, which has been there since 1987, or they've been there since 1987, but was supposed to be removed when they moved the stadium there, but somehow was expanded, that this somehow is contributing to a breakdown of soft tissue. That's the best I got. So could you explain like what the theory is?
Yeah, so the theory is essentially, if you look at a map or satellite image of the practice facility and Levi Stadium in general, because it's all in the same complex, there's this electrical substation called Jazmyn Substation that's directly adjacent to the practice facility. Like the field is literally right there. And if you look at some of the shots, like the B-roll from practice there, you'll see like some players literally throwing, catching the ball, and the substation is like right there. So you can see the proximity is quite close. So the theory is that essentially ELF magnetic fields from the substation, and we'll talk about what that is, are causing metabolic harm, mitochondrial harm, which then leads to tissue dehydration and decompensation of not only the tissues themselves, but immune function. And I know some players were talking about early on, like some issues with like potential cancer risk and things like that. And we can talk about that as well. So that's kind of the notion. And, we opened this up by listening to the owner talk about how this has not been an issue in these decades. So why is it suddenly an issue? Well, one thing we need to discuss right up front is that the Tasman substation that exists now is not the same substation that existed in 1987. This substation has been dramatically upgraded and increased flux of electricity coming through this area, especially as San Francisco area has emerged as essentially one of the primary tech hubs of the US. There are a lot of data centers and big tech companies that rely on this substation in particular to power them. And so the flux going through this particular substation has been increased dramatically through upgrades. And it's kind of been hard to find the paper trail on exactly when certain upgrades occurred. But what we can say for sure on the timeline is that in 2007, before Levi Stadium was approved to be constructed, there was an agenda within the city of Santa Clara to take this substation and move it somewhere else or modify it significantly in some way to accommodate this incoming stadium. And from what I can tell, based on the agendas and like the files that are available online, that there was $20 million earmarked to accomplish that. And of course, back in 2007, it would have been much easier to move this thing because today, like I said, it serves as this major contributor to the tech hub, to these giant data centers and tech companies, et cetera. So this 20 million was earmarked. And then what seems like happened after that is there was a bunch of bureaucracy around who's paying for this because the town, the city of Santa Clara wanted the team to pay for it, saying that it was their problem and they should be funding it. And initially, I guess the understanding was Santa Clara would pay for it, like the city. And so it seems like there was a lot of back and forth going on. And then as a result, nothing ever happened. Somehow there was just kind of lost in translation. And so the substation, keeps persisting, being upgraded, et cetera, until we get to today. And so from the stats that I've seen, it looks like since 2017, roughly, the Niners have had the league leading injuries with a total of over 2,000 games missed due to injuries. And so one piece of information that would be very helpful for us in order to kind of investigate this further, because we can absolutely talk about the mechanisms of why this is plausible and how this could be mechanistically causing soft tissue injuries in particular. But when it comes to evidence to support that, like real world evidence, it would be great to have records around when updates were made to that substation. Because also there's a lot of variables, right? So like depending on the time of day and the load on the grid, the magnetic flux coming off of that thing could be magnitudes higher than other times of day. So depending on when they're practicing, what their proximity is, the really important thing to understand about EMFs, electromagnetic fields, is that there's something called the inverse square law that's very important. So the inverse square law states that the closer you are to a source of EMFs, the higher the dose you receive. So if you're on the practice field next to this thing, you could be receiving one dose, but maybe if you're on those other practice fields all the way across the way, I think there's like some youth soccer teams practice there or something, they may be receiving next to nothing. Mm-hmm. So proximity really matters when it comes to these fields. They drop off precipitously. Mm-hmm. One other thing I want to mention about magnetic fields, and then, I'll let you ask a couple questions because I don't want to ramble for too long, but the issue with these magnetic fields coming from something like the AC power grid is that they are modulated in what's called the ELF range, or the extreme low frequency range. So to paint the picture, before 1900, the only EMFs that we were exposed to as humans were sunlight, the Earth's magnetic field, what's called the Schumann resonance, which is a natural ELF that's present and created on the Earth as a response to lightning strikes. So lightning strikes over 1,000 times per second on Earth, and it basically, between the ionosphere and the surface of the Earth, is this essentially a resonant cavity. It's similar to like a guitar. So like when you pluck the guitar string, you create this resonance effect. And so when lightning strikes the Earth, this resonation occurs around 7.83 hertz is this frequency of the Schumann resonance, which is the natural ELF that we are exposed to as biological life on Earth. No other ELFs existed outside of that up until we started rolling out the power grid in the early 1900s, and it's called the AC power grid, the alternating current power grid, because it alternates in the ELF range. In the US, it's at 60 hertz. So ELFs range anywhere between 1 up through around 300 hertz. So the AC power grid is alternating at 60 hertz. In Europe, it's 50 hertz, but they're both in the ELF range. And the point of what I'm saying this for is that we are essentially muddying the waters, because if you look at Becker's work and Fry's work and a lot of early researchers and up through today, you can see that the ELFs, when you disrupt them, when you disrupt the way that they're interfacing with the body, all biological life, all mammalian life, you can do cells, you can do humans, there's been lots of studies on this. When you remove the exposure to these ELF frequency, the biocycles and the rhythms, the natural rhythms of the body begin to diminish. So the early studies on this were basically if you put somebody inside of a Faraday cage, which blocks exposure to all radiation, including the natural and the unnatural, that their circadian rhythm gradually stretches out. So you no longer have this 24-hour cycle. It becomes much longer because the body entrains to the natural ELFs present in the environment. You can't see them, but they're there, and they're having a profound effect on how our cells know when to do certain things, how they know when to release certain factors, hormone production, melatonin production, cortisol, like all these different factors in the body that
Just
are very, very
regulation in
important.
general.
Yes, exactly. Regulation, growth control, cellular division, metabolism, mitochondrial function, all of these things. And so in the modern day, when we're now exposed to a ton of frequencies in ranges that our biology has never seen before. So the radio frequencies are an example, the new ELF frequencies that are in our, military tech and also in the power grid, another example. They're muddying the waters essentially, and our biology doesn't know how to compute that because it's not ancestrally consistent, it's not evolutionarily consistent. And so when it comes to the power grid, the 60 hertz magnetic fields coming from something like a substation, which has a bunch of transformers in it essentially, so those are generating these massive magnetic fields that do drop off precipitously, but Peter Cohn, who kind of blew the whistle on this, we're not related, by the way. But he essentially went to the practice field and the stadium and took measurements, and his measurements showed at least 4x times like the background magnetic field that you would expect in just like any old environment. So there's clearly an elevation. Like I said, that's going to vary depending on the time of day and the proximity as well. And also, kind of an aside, but there's probably some interindividual susceptibilities to being affected by it, which we can maybe talk about, though I would say that's kind of at the bleeding edge and something that I'm interested in studying in my lab. But yeah, that's what I would say for now, that the ELF magnetic fields from the substation, they're significant. They're there. We have data showing that these pulsed magnetic fields cause oxidative stress in humans, in other mammals, in cells, in a dish. And when you have oxidative stress over time, you get the breakdown of proteins, you get the oxidation of proteins and lipids, you create this inflammatory environment, you get mitochondrial dysfunction, and the mitochondria are responsible for making the vast majority of energy that our tissues need in order to thrive and survive. And mitochondria are not only making energy, but they're also making deuterium depleted metabolic water. It's a special type of water that's made only in the mitochondria that is very important for tissue hydration. So when you start damaging mitochondria, damaging water production, you start dehydrating tissues. And when you get dehydrated tissues like tendons, ligaments, and fascia in general, you start to get very vulnerable tissues that are more susceptible to injury. And we don't need to have a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study showing this exact impact from the frequencies at a substation to be able to speculate here and to draw conclusions that this is most likely, not safe. And if something can be done about it, it should. At the very least, players should be educated on how to bolster themselves against these exposures. But at best, either that moves or they just move the field, or maybe they move over to the youth soccer fields across the way. Like, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. But the last thing I'll mention before I pass it back to you is a lot of EMFs can be shielded against, but magnetic fields are particularly troublesome when it comes to that. You can't block a magnetic field. You can only redirect magnetic field lines. And so literally, if you wanted to just stay at the same practice facility and on that field, you would have to build basically a giant iron dome or ring around the field to redirect those magnetic field lines to prevent them from crossing through the field. And this is just kind of not realistic. So I think the bottom line is we need to educate players. We need to either move the substation, unlikely. Move the practice field, more likely. And, it seems like just a way too big of a risk to be taking when we do have information, data, and science to support the fact that this could very well be an issue, even if we don't have conclusive evidence saying that it is.
Well, you heard the owner completely dismiss this while kind of giggling about it. Like, boy, anyone with a rational brain understands this is hocus pocus, which is interesting because his best players have come out. Just yesterday, Christian McCaffrey at the Pro Bowl said it's not nothing, and he's concerned. Kyle Juszczyk, who went to Harvard, he's concerned. I mean, a lot of players seem concerned. So you just alluded to it, but in your professional opinion, in your expert opinion, do you feel this substation is at least contributing to the Niners' outrageous injury issue?
Yeah, first of all, it's not doing anything positive, and it's highly likely to be doing something negative, especially because they spend so much time there. Like, again, when we're talking about dosage, we're talking about proximity, and we're talking about duration. So if they're spending hours there, every day for weeks on end, during the off season, on season, like, obviously they're traveling a bit from time to time, and maybe it could be interesting to look at, maybe we can see some correlations between, time spent there versus when injuries are happening, and it's kind of going to be kind of spurious. So it will be hard to exactly say this is 100% the cause. And of course, injuries are going to be multifactorial anyways, but this is basically creating a foundation that is vulnerable to injury. So if we want to support players' mitochondrial function, which I'm wearing my sweater, Make Mitochondria Great Again, because that's kind of my mission, is to educate people on this, athletes, lay people. Everyone needs to know about mitochondrial health and function, because mitochondrial dysfunction is at the root of every chronic disease that we're facing in the West. So it's important for everybody to know. And EMFs are one of the things that are not talked about that are creating mitochondrial dysfunction and fomenting it over long periods of time. It would be one thing if we were just exposed impulses, but it's happening 24/7. These players are playing on this field next to the substation, and they're going home and they're surrounded by Wi-Fi. They're surrounded by 5G. They have obviously their own power going to their home that also has that alternating current at 60 hertz. And essentially their bodies are never getting a break. And if you expect these players to perform at the highest level and demand that level of excellence from their bioenergetic systems, of course, you're going to run into issues because, you're basically pushing them to the breaking point. And so, in my opinion, absolutely, this needs to be dealt with in a very serious manner. To talk about this as if it's a laughing matter is disrespectful to the players, which in my opinion, these players are often just treated as meat and workhorses, and they're not respected as individuals, and their long-term health is not considered. And I think it's a damn shame. And I'm glad that some of these players are, actually being open-minded and questioning this and looking out for themselves, because, in my opinion, the league is not going to look out for them. They're not being valued as as they should. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. It's hard to say that like this is 100% the only cause of these injuries, but given how much of an outlier the Niners are with regards to injuries and the fact that this is a problem, I say do the experiment. Move them to another practice field, see what happens. Give it a season or two, see what the data looks like. If we get improvements, great. If we don't, back to the drawing board. But it seems like that at a bare minimum should be the next move.
It does seem to me, a layperson, that when Jed York goes on and says, well, we've been there since 1987 and it wasn't an issue for Jerry Rice, it seems disingenuous because the world has changed so much since 1987. Obviously the substation has changed a lot since 1987, but the world has changed, and now there's all these 5G things and Wi-Fi things that weren't there. So you have to account for that. And it seems like the research is young, new, except for the guy you talked about from 1950.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think people think that this isn't a very well-researched space, and it really is. It's just that this research is not discussed. It's not openly talked about. It's not publicized. So if you look online, you can go on PubMed and you can search up EMF literature, and you'll see a ton coming from, every year back from the 50s and before up through today, but it's typically smaller journals from smaller labs that are like doing their best to contribute to this space, but it's not going to get the bells and whistles in the front page because it's not convenient. This information is very inconvenient because It will
It
make
costs people money. It doesn't make people money.
That's right. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
It makes dollars.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the problem. And this is also why this kind of needs to be a decentralized movement of people asking questions and doing research and deciding to protect themselves, because, you know, the machine is doing its thing. It's not going to course correct because some inconvenient research is brought to light. It's like we have to each individually make decisions to try to do better in our own homes and our own lives. And, you know, that's kind of how it is with health in general, to be honest. But this issue in particular, especially because you can't control if somebody decides to build a cell tower next to your home. Like, there's literally in the US in particular, the regulations around this are insane compared to a lot of European countries are much more strict around where cell towers can be placed, for example. Here in the US, you can put a cell tower next to a nursing home, a hospital, an elementary school. They can go anywhere. There's no consideration for the health effects. And in fact, if you look at the official stance on EMFs, they'll say, oh, yes, they're an issue, but only the thermal effects are a problem, meaning that tissue heating, because these radio frequencies like 5G, for example, there's some overlap into the microwave range. So you can get some tissue heating, tissue dehydration, which is a problem. But they fail to recognize that there is a large corpus of literature showing non-thermal effects where we're talking about, you know, subtle mitochondrial dysfunction that is, you know, exacerbated over time and then can foment into chronic disease states as a result of that. So, you know, it's just, there's a lot of half truths being spun by the regulatory agencies and the powers that be, despite other countries actually taking a more strict stance on it. So it's a big problem. Like I said, like one of my goals is to really shed light on this topic and just share that there is actually a lot of data out here on this. If people are really curious and want to learn more, that they can, you know, check out literature. I have, well, in addition to the book club where I've been going through the body electric and cross currents, I also have a bunch of highlight reels and posts and talking about EMFs, how to protect yourself. And we can talk about some strategies as well, because like I said, the athletes, at the very least, they need to do some things to help protect themselves in the interim. And so there are some things that we can do to help bolster the biology against these exposures.
We're going to get into that next, what the athletes can do to protect themselves, what the Niners can do to protect their athletes. Jed York mentioned waving a magic wand. I don't think that's going to be the solution. Before we get there, I want to shout out the sponsor for today's show, 1-800-CONTACTS. For over 30 years, 1-800-CONTACTS has been the leader in online contact lens delivery with millions of contacts in stock and award-winning customer service. Here's what sets them apart from everyone else. They offer fast, free shipping on every order and have over 100 million contact lenses in stock, ready to ship from their distribution centers across the country. Their best price guarantee means if you find your contacts at a lower price elsewhere, they'll beat it. That's a promise you won't find everywhere. They have extra discounts for new customers on their site. Their 24/7 customer support is there if you ever need help day or night. Whether you have a strong prescription or astigmatism, they'll deliver your contacts with fast, free shipping straight to your mailbox. Doc, you've been using 1-800-CONTACTS. Tell the people how good they are.
Easy peasy. Like, as long as you have an up-to-date prescription, you can just place the order through their app and you get them very quickly and you don't have to leave your home. It's definitely very convenient. I particularly like to use the Dailies contacts in the purple and white box because they don't block UV light. And that's outside of this conversation, but part of my light biology research shows that you really want UV light coming in through the eye. It's very important for biological signaling, weight management, appetite regulation, energy expenditure, metabolism, mood, dopamine status. So anyway, those are the ones that I recommend and the ones that I order from 1-800-CONTACTS.
Thank you. Getting contacts doesn't have to be a hassle. Let 1-800-CONTACTS get you the contact lenses you need right now. Order online at 1-800-CONTACTS.com or download the free 1-800-CONTACTS app today. Okay, Dr. Alexis, what would you suggest the 49ers do? Should they just, it doesn't seem like you can move the substation at this point. Seems like it's pretty important to the whole region. So should they just experiment with moving their practice field just to see what happens, just to see if there's an effect?
That's absolutely the best experiment, in my opinion. That's going to be the most unbiased one as well. We want to get, you know, a decent distance away from that place, but also ideally, like, hopefully that it's not directly next to a cell tower either, because then we could create another issue and conundrum. So we want to find somewhere that's, you know, reasonable distance from a cell tower, from the substation. And, you know, we could easily also, there's building biologists and EMF biologists that can go out and they can do readings and they can assess the the health of the environment from an EMF standpoint and make recommendations. So I would recommend the organization, they hire somebody that can do that for them to get some readings on new potential areas, take up that new facility, that new practice field, play there for a couple seasons and see what happens to your injuries. This is like the most unbiased experiment that can be done.
Yeah, it seems like what they could say is, hey, we don't know yet. We're doing our due diligence. In the meantime, just to be careful, we're going to move our practice facility for indefinitely, because that's how seriously we take our player safety. Even though we don't know if this is really the fact, they could do that. Instead, they've been extremely dismissive.
That's
so
right.
until they change their tune, what would you recommend the players do to protect themselves?
Yeah, so from the player's standpoint, there's quite a few things that we can do to support mitochondrial function outside and on the field as well. So one thing that you can do, as I mentioned earlier, something that the mitochondria make that's very important from a tissue hydration and tissue fidelity standpoint is deuterium depleted metabolic water. But you can actually also buy deuterium depleted water. It's a little bit pricey, but I think they can afford it, and it's worth it in this case. So deuterium depleted water, I recommend getting it from light water. You can get down to 5 parts per million. Typically, water is around 130 to 150 parts per million of deuterium. Deuterium is a heavy form of hydrogen. It's not radioactive, but what it does is it gunks up the mitochondrial engines and makes them less efficient. So when you get mitochondrial dysfunction from EMFs or from, living an indoor lifestyle around all these frequencies, never getting outside in the sun, never grounding your bare feet on the earth, being sedentary, you can essentially start to get these mitochondria accumulating deuterium, which then further begets more dysfunction and more gunking up of that engine. And so we have really strong data in humans showing that deuterium depleted water consumption will essentially help with cancer patients to increase rates of remission in combination with chemotherapies, and also reversing and ameliorating insulin resistance in type 2 diabetics. So we know that deuterium depleted water works really well in these pathological conditions to help reduce the burden of mitochondria and improve metabolic health. Similarly, if you're at the top of your game and you're really pushing your bioenergetic system to work its best, you want to make sure that your deuterium levels are optimized in your body, in your mitochondria, so that you can actually get the most out of them, especially in the context of chronic EMF exposures like this. So I would recommend doing a deuterium depleted water protocol. Typically, what they would do is they would take a bottle of the 5 parts per million water. It's like 16 fluid ounces. And then you would dilute that in a 1 to 3 dilution with the regular drinking water. So basically 1 16 fluid ounce bottle, and then 48 of regular drinking water, 48 ounces. Mix that together, and that's your drinking water all day, every day. For them, I would say just stay on that water. That's going to be around 100 parts per million deuterium. That will help to optimize the deuterium load in the body and help their mitochondria to work better. Outside of that, kind of just alluded to it, but let me be explicit about it. Sunlight, super important for mitochondrial function, in particular UV and infrared light, very, very important for the mitochondria's ability to make energy, to make water, and also to make biophotons. So what a lot of people don't know is our mitochondria make their own light in the UV range. And actually the UV light made in mitochondria is even stronger than the light produced in the sun. So UVC photons are made in our mitochondria, and they play a very important role in signaling, in growth control, in regulation of cell division, and in a lot of things that we're only just beginning to understand as well. So in order to effectively harness and support those mitochondria, we need near infrared light exposure. There's a problem though. In the modern day, window glass blocks near infrared light. Near infrared is thermal, so it generates heat, but it's also very penetrative. So when you're exposed to sunlight, for example, there's a high fraction of near infrared light. It penetrates all the way through the body. It literally touches every mitochondria in your system. It even goes through your bone, into your brain, through your skull. And so our bodies are designed to be exposed to near infrared light as long as the sun is out. Even on a cloudy day, it doesn't matter. Modern humans are indoors behind glass that blocks near infrared light. We're under LED and fluorescent bulbs that contain no near infrared light. We're on device screens that contain no near infrared light. Our bodies are starving for this frequency that is required to effectively engage mitochondrial function, to produce this hydrating metabolic water, to produce energy. And so we need to be optimizing our sun exposure habits off the field if we're talking about these players. So first thing in the morning, Get your butt outside, morning light in eyes on as much skin as possible. Do that for 5 to 15 minutes minimum. Ideally, you also want to get your bare feet on the earth. Grounding, it's not just some woo-woo hippie thing. Our bodies are meant to be electrically grounded to the earth. If not, they accumulate what is basically static charge. So an excess of positive charge, in the same way that like if you like rub a balloon and then you like stick it to your hair and it stays there, like what you're doing is creating excess positive charge that creates this stickiness. Our bodies are meant to be discharging that all the time through the earth. The earth is basically a giant negative charge soup that can suck up that positive charge and neutralize charge in the body, which also directly supports mitochondrial function. And we have data showing that in chronically inflamed individuals, even just 20 minutes of grounding will dramatically reduce inflammation. And you can look at that through a thermograph. So you can see hot inflamed areas before grounding, and after, those areas are completely cooled down. So even just 20 minutes a day of bare feet on earth, very, very important when it comes to mitochondrial function. Then when it comes to midday sun, midday is obviously when UV is at its peak. Most people know that because they're told to slip, slap, slap the sunscreen and put the sunglasses on and avoid it at all costs. It's the devil. Like, it's going to give you cancer immediately. Couldn't be further from the truth. UV light is a very, very important input for all people, but especially people with more melanin. The more melanin you have in your skin, the more UV light you need in order to thrive and optimize your performance. Vitamin D is a really good biomarker for this because vitamin D is made from UVB light in particular. And so that UVB light interacts with cholesterol in the skin to make pre-vitamin D that goes into the bloodstream and gets converted in the liver and kidneys into the final form. So 25-hydroxyvitamin D is the blood storage form of vitamin D. And it's, as long as you're not supplementing, it serves as a biomarker for your sun exposure habits. So if your vitamin D is low, optimal is between 60 and 80 nanograms per mil. Most people are walking around less than 30 and most less than 20, to be honest, especially if you have darker skin and live in the US. So all of my melanated brothers on the 49ers, they need to be getting their butts outside midday with as much skin exposed as possible, because the more skin is exposed, the more vitamin D you're going to make. But not only that, the more nitric oxide you make as well, which is produced in response to UVA light. A lot of people will know about nitric oxide if they're, into the gym and getting a good pump in. You'll take nitric oxide boosters in order to enhance blood flow. Well, UVA light is a primary mechanism by which the body makes nitric oxide, and it's also in the skin and it diffuses into the bloodstream. So if you want to get better athletic performance, better sexual performance, which is not really relevant to this, but relevant to dudes in general, tend to like that information, improved blood flow, you're going to get improved athletic performance and improved nutrient and oxygen delivery to tissues and waste removal from tissues. You want to get as much skin exposed as possible during, any time that UVA light is present. So typically, within a couple hours after sunrise to a couple hours before sunset. UVB peaks midday, depending on the latitude. The Niners, I don't think in San Francisco, they lose UVB light at all at their latitude. So, going out midday whenever possible, shirts off, shorts, like really soaking that up. And then the last piece to this for just like the basic lifestyle optimization to support themselves is at nighttime, we want to remove blue light completely. So if you're going to be on device screens, you want to put a filter on your screen, red filter on your computer, red filter on your phone. If you can't do that, wear a pair of blue blocking glasses that have a dark orange lens. Those are going to remove selectively the blue input. Blue light signals to the body that it's midday. So if you're getting the signal that it's midday at nighttime, you're creating a timing failure in your system that is going to affect everything from head to toe, essentially, because everything in our body is coordinated to the master clock in our brain, which is directly connected to the back of our eye. So when we're exposed to blue light, that goes to the master clock in the brain called the SCN, the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That master clock decides, okay, what time it is. If there's blue light, it's sometime midday. We're going to tell the body to engage in these certain behaviors and endocrine functions. We're going to increase cortisol. We're going to, activate metabolism. We're going to activate appetite, these types of things. We're going to support metabolic function. At nighttime, we're supposed to be in a rest and recovery mode. And so if we're exposed to blue light at night, we're never getting into that mode. We're suppressing melatonin production and function, which, by the way, EMF exposure has been shown to reduce melatonin production at the level of the mitochondria. So the melatonin made in our brain that is released when it's dark, when low blue light and low bright light in the environment is present, that helps us get sleepy and go to sleep and get good quality sleep and all that. But the melatonin made in our mitochondria plays critical roles in maintaining mitochondrial function. And so that actually ties back into the near-infrared light story that I mentioned earlier, because near-infrared light directly stimulates melatonin production in the mitochondria. So we need the near-infrared light, we need the midday sun, we need to block blue light at night, get red light bulbs at night. If you come to my house, all the lights are red. All the athletes I work with, their houses are dark, they're using candles, they're using red lights at night. They're turning their Wi-Fi off in their homes or their apartments off at night, because the closer you are to a source of EMFs, the higher the dose you're receiving. And if you're already getting blasted at work, for example, you need to do what you can at home, especially during sleep. That's 8 hours of your life that if you can get that optimized, you're setting yourself up to be, on the right foot. You want a cool, dark room, pitch black room. Even small amounts of light at night shown to increase insulin resistance and mitochondrial function the next day. If you do that every single night, if you have night lights on in your room or you're sleeping with the TV on, you are literally creating metabolic dysfunction day to day. So for these athletes that need to work at the highest level, they need to be dialing all of this stuff in. And, they can see the proof of work themselves. Don't take my word for it. Implement these things. See how you feel a week later. Tell me you don't notice a difference, because all of my athletes will say they 100% notice a difference, and they become all in on this because it's just very low-hanging fruit that's predominantly free. The only thing that costs money is the deuterium-depleted water. And outside of that, you can dramatically improve performance, output, force transduction, tissue quality, reduce injuries, improve mood, improve your life quality outside of playing as well. And so those would be like my bare bones recommendations for what these players need to do in order to serve themselves while they're waiting on, upper management to do something about their working conditions.
I got one too. Tell me if you agree. Spend as little time at the facility as possible.
Yes.
Like if it's March and you're rehabbing a torn ACL, do that in Florida.
Yes.
Do it in Nova Scotia, not next to the substation.
Yes, 100%. Whenever you can reduce your proximity and dose to a source of, EMF like this, especially one that these players are exposed to consistently for long periods of time and long weeks at a time, spend as much time as you can away from that. And like, I totally agree. Ideally, go more south, not more north. So go south, you get better sun there, beach access, more time outdoors, more pleasant weather. So off season, go south. Highly recommend. Check out Central America. It's absolutely gorgeous. I just got back from there last month. Spent some time in El Salvador last year as well. Beautiful, beautiful beaches. Anywhere there's a volcano as well. The volcanic activity is really a good sign that your mitochondria are going to love that area, because the magnetic flux there, the Earth's magnetic flux, is stronger and different in those areas in a good way. Obviously, that's like natural magnetism and not like our fluctuating AC power grid magnetic fields. So if you want to travel somewhere, go somewhere that there's a beach and also a volcano nearby, and that's like manna for your mitochondria if you want like a little oasis retreat to help rehab yourself.
Okay, I want to ask you this. You could talk about this all day, clearly. You've been studying this for years. A lot of people have been studying this for their entire lives. Then you ask the Niners, they're football people. They're not scientists. And then John Lynch is like, oh, there's no research. And Jed York complete. Why are so many people so dismissive of this entirely?
I think it's honestly a long-term programming issue, whereby I think it's also a bit of an appeal to authority thing, where the assumption is if this technology and all this stuff is rolled out, it's assumed that it must be safe because our government cares about us so much and cares about our health so much. Meanwhile, if you look
That's how capitalism works.
That's right. It's the crony capitalism. And if you look at the proof of work for this, like, okay, if our government cares about us so much and our healthcare system is so wonderful, why are we the sickest we've ever been as a population? Why is our lifespan decreasing for the first time in modern history? Why are our birth rates and fertility rates at an all-time low? Like, clearly our perspective and what we're doing is highly dysfunctional. And so if that's the case, which it is, that means that we need to start questioning everything we assumed to be true. And unfortunately, a lot of times in positions of power, there is this resistance to admitting that one is wrong. There is a resistance to new information if it is somewhat of an inconvenience financially or otherwise. And I think that's really the dynamics that we're seeing at play right now. But I mean, in my opinion, they should have really headed this off by just being open about it, because then they don't have to look like idiots down the line when, if we were able to show like, yeah, this actually was a major contributor and, we moved the practice field and now suddenly we're a much healthier team. They're gonna look like fools. And obviously it's never too late to tell the truth and just be like honest about where we stand and like where they are intellectually and research wise around these issues. But I think it pays to be open and honest from the start and not like double down and be super rigid around topics that they frankly have no understanding of. They're not equipped to analyze research or understand the quality of research and understand the breadth of the research that is present in the literature over the last 70 plus years. Like, I don't think they're doing their due diligence to actually look into those things. They're probably deferring to quote unquote experts who also haven't looked into it and are just conditioned to say, oh, this is nonsense. So,
I mean, what I think,
cherry pick your experts, basically.
What I think, like when you have absolutely no knowledge of something and you're instantly dismissive, it makes me wonder, like, your motivation. Do you have a conflict of interest? Is it possible that the 49ers knew this was a potential issue, didn't do anything, and if they acknowledge it now, then they open themselves up to like unfathomable lawsuits? I mean, that's what I wonder. Otherwise, why wouldn't they say, you know what, we're moving our practice facility just in case? Just in case.
That's true. And I mean, from what I've seen, there were some player interviews floating around showing that, oh yeah, there's been like talk for a while now that like this substation's here, and like there was like cancer was brought up and other issues
20 years
like,
ago.
Yeah. So it's like, this is not new. And clearly there's been chatter going on around it. And, the fact that it's coming to light now, I mean, it's kind of a shame it took so long, but I'm glad that we're having the conversation at the very least and making people at least ask the question, like, could this be an issue? How can I support myself? Even if this field doesn't move, like, how can I best support myself? Because, if nothing is done, it seems very clear that this organization doesn't care to really take care of their players and just is more worried about the bottom line, frankly. So I'm hoping that some, like we said, our unbiased research study is move the field, see what happens. It's not that hard. Like, that's actually a very low cost intervention and test to do. And I don't really see any reason that it would hurt. It could only help. And so that's kind of my perspective on that issue.
Well, I guess if the Niners magically stay healthy next year, this issue might go away, but that just hasn't happened. It's year after year. It's game after game.
Yep.
So we see what they're trying to do. John Lynch has spoken about it. Jed York has spoken about it. They're saying it's pretty much a nothing burger and that people should let it go. But the leaders on the team are talking about it. Do you think that the powers that be will be able to convince NFL players that this is nothing to worry about? Or do you think this is an issue that's going to linger or even get louder, bigger?
Well, if it's up to me, I'm going to keep screeching about it. So hopefully, it can at least live rent-free in players' minds. And I think ultimately the free market will decide, like, if these players keep getting injured, keep seeing their teammates getting injured, they're going to decide to go somewhere else. And that's going to be a problem for the organization. Maybe then they will finally take this seriously, but we'll let the free market decide, I guess, at the end of the day.
All right, we got some questions. Noah Chardon says, for Jed not to acknowledge that this could be a factor contributing to player injury is asinine. Science is great, but science seems to be influenced by money quite often. How many free agents are crossing off San Francisco?
Yeah, I mean,
You'd like to at least hear that they're concerned about it.
Yeah.
If I could
It's
wave my
encouraging that
magic
the players are talking about it, in my opinion. I think that's a really good sign. And hopefully a positive omen of things to come and changes to come.
Anthony says, Dr. Cowan, can you talk about the efficacy of TMS therapy as a treatment for concussion syndrome?
So I'm not an expert by any means on what I think he means is transcranial magnetic stimulation. And it seems like there's some promising data on that. It wouldn't be my first recommendation or thought of a therapy when it comes to concussion. And obviously concussion is a very important aspect and consideration in this sport in particular. Really important things when it comes to concussion are metabolic status. So the brain post-concussion is inflamed and it's really bad at taking up glucose and using glucose efficiently. And so in a post-concussion state, if you don't have ketones present in the bloodstream, whether it's from fasting, ketogenic diet, or taking an exogenous ketone, the brain essentially begins to starve to death. And so that would be number one thing, is like getting somebody into a state of ketosis if they were just recently had a concussion of essentially any grade. Probably augmenting with an exogenous ketone as well to help keep levels higher. And outside of that, the basics of quantum and light biology that we talked about are going to serve you immensely here, because also when a brain is inflamed, this timing issue that we talked about becomes more of an issue, especially if you're constantly also blasting yourself with artificial light, blue light, screens, etc., which further inhibits mitochondrial function. I didn't mention this earlier, but blue light from our device screens, our LED and fluorescent bulbs that are highly enriched in blue, directly impairs mitochondrial function on our surfaces, on our skin, eyes, and proximal brain regions. So in the post-concussion state that is already dealing with inflammation, we really want to minimize those exposures, and we really want to maximize sunlight exposure. UV light is directly anti-inflammatory. Vitamin D also plays a very important role in immune function and inflammation post-injury in general. And of course, optimizing our near-infrared light exposure as well, because near-infrared light, like I said, can penetrate through even the skull to reach the brain. And in that post-concussion state, it's going to need even more than otherwise, other than just a normal person. And so we need to optimize our light environments that way as well. Our grounding, our sunlight. And there are definitely different therapies out there. The other thing that you really want to make sure that is not an issue is probably do a sleep study if you had a concussion or you're dealing with this, because if you have any sleep apnea or airway obstruction during the nighttime, that's going to only further exacerbate these issues, especially because when you have concussions and head impact injuries, it can cause bones to shift around. It can cause muscular imbalances in the face that can create torsions, which can then basically make it harder to breathe through your nose. So these are just some considerations to think about. I don't know about the TMS that much with regards to efficacy relative to doing all of these other more foundational things, but it does seem promising in some of the studies that I've seen.
The Last Hero says also Niners did their summer training camps in Rockland from 80s to late 90s and trained at the University of the Pacific until 2003. That's true. Previous generations did not practice at Santa Clara all year. That's the truth.
That's a good point. That's right. I mean, yeah, like we said, the duration of exposure is directly impacting the dose that is being received. So all of these things can be taken into account. I really love to see the documents around when the Tasman substation was upgraded at each point, because I know it's been upgraded multiple times since 2007. If we see some massive upgrades around 2017, which I wouldn't be surprised, because that was right around the tech boom in this, major tech hub. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw some massive upgrades happen there around that time, which is when the injuries really, really took off for the Niners.
Well, I'll ask Jed York. He'll tell me.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd be so honest about it. He knows everything.
I'm so grateful that he said that today. Dr. Alexis and I have been talking about this for a week, and we could have done it last week, but I wanted to wait until Super Bowl week, and it was perfect timing. Jed, thank you very much. So flippant, so dismissive. 1987. Well, a lot has changed in the last 40 years. I hope he watched this. I hope the players watch this, and I hope this motivates the 49ers to do something. And if you just tuned in, Dr. Alexis's major takeaway is move the practice field. Move it. Simple as that. Dr. Alexis, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. I really love sharing this message with athletes, with lay people, with everybody who needs to hear it, really, because this is just a modern human issue in general, but in particular for these players who, they're not getting informed consent around the matter at the end of the day. And so educating on this topic is really important, and continue educating yourself. If this is something that kind of struck a chord with you, continue looking into it. Like I mentioned, read The Body Electric, read Cross Currents by Becker. Your eyes will be opened. You'll see that this research literally goes back to the 1950s, and that it's just not discussed. It's not that we don't have enough research. It's just that it's not talked about. So hopefully just continuing this education train, riding this momentum. I'm just going to continue yapping on about this on my socials as well. So if you're interested, come on over and visit me there.
I'm sure the players appreciate this. I'm sure their families appreciate you. And I'm sure Jed York appreciates you dearly. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right. I'll get through the rest of the super chats now, and then we got prize picks, baby. Joseph Ernberg says, Substation or not, this team's old grandpa players will all be injured again, reset entirely, and trade everyone. Why expect difference without change? All right, thank you very much for being the curmudgeon that you always are, Joseph Ernberg. Daza says, even if there isn't conclusive evidence the Substation is causing the injuries, the potential impact on free agent signings, Niners players not extending, it seems worth the cost of doing something about it. I 100% agree it seems worth the cost of doing something about it. And the fact that the Niners are so reluctant to do anything about it makes me feel like they're guilty and they know it. I mean, why wouldn't they want to? If there was a 0.1% chance this was affecting their players, why wouldn't they? He said, if there was something I could do to make sure that we're not the most injured team in the league, this is something you could do. Boom. The doctor just said you could move your practice. You could go to San Jose State. You could go to Stanford. You could go to the facility that the Raiders had in Alameda. It's just sitting there. It's beautiful. It's way closer to my house than I would prefer that. Just move to Oakland in general. There's a stadium here. There's a practice facility. I live here. It's a great city. It was ranked the #1 food city in America, according to New York Times. That's right. It's a true story. David Butler says, is it possible to build some type of wall to protect the facility? She said there was a possibility you could build an iron dome around the facility, which I think would be hilarious. It would only probably cost them about $1 billion. It might actually make the stadium nicer because now there would be relief from the sunlight that is so oppressive during September. Bill Kennedy says, so a tinfoil fence is not the solution. I don't think that's the solution. Dr. Rockman says, fantastic conversation. In the name of complete science, it would be nice to have another academic interview using the exact same questions with someone with an opposing view. Maybe bring them together. That's a good idea. It's a great idea. Bill Kennedy, opinion on grounded sheets. Dr. Lex probably asked you about it. Make sure you follow her on Instagram. She has 66,000 followers. Dr. Alexis Jazmyn, Jazmyn. She's killing it over there and educating people every day. Anthony, we got you. Noah, we got you. Joseph Ernberg says, Grant truly is the lead quality control of this team. Do what I can. Godspeed, says Grant. But Kurt Bankert said that they also spend 80% of their time off the field time in the building next to the practice field. They would need to move that too, right? Well, she did say what's interesting about the Substation is it's literally right next to the practice field. So I wonder if, the DBs and the linebackers who were on that side have more exposure than like the offensive linemen and the defensive linemen who are really far away. And did the Niners do that on purpose because they don't want the 300-pound people being affected? Oh my God, they're in trouble. They're in trouble. They're in trouble. They better prove they didn't know. Joseph Ernberg says, if I saw this as a Niners player, I'd be suing. Jed, if you're watching, I just asked questions. I was just asking questions. Don't sue me. Boxing Fan Times 4 says, could you see the 2026 draft class hold out? How about this? What if the Yorks try to sell the team one day and the people trying to buy it like, yeah, but what about what's with this Substation? I don't want to buy that. You ever think about that? Oh man, that'd be great. Noah says, Jed looks like a dum-dum after this live stream. This is the standard view of most of the population, though. He definitely does not have an elite mind. Or he has a conflict of interest. I don't know. Anyway, let's do something that has nothing to do with this stream whatsoever. Prize Picks. Because they sponsor my channel and they make all this possible. Let's put it on the screen. Hold on. Boom. Here we go. I don't want to do Super Bowl Prize Picks. I've been doing it all week. Let's do Warriors Prize Picks. Because they're such a great team. Brandon Podziemski, everyone's favorite player with the name Podziemski. 15.5 points. Boy, he hasn't touched that in a while. I don't think today will be the day either. Sorry, Brandon. Okay, DeAnthony Melton. 15 points. I like DeAnthony Melton. I think he's going to do it 2 games in a row. Kelly Oubre, he used to be on the Warriors, 16.5 points. Oh, yeah. Revenge game for Kelly. Moses Moody. No, I'm not going to touch Moses Moody. Buddy Hield. Al Horford. 8.5. Oh, he's heating up. He had 13 in the last game. Yeah, absolutely. Al, probably the sciatica is not feeling great. Isn't it funny how Niners people go to Warriors games and Warriors people get hurt? Maybe they're bringing the EMF. Maybe they're like radioactive. I don't understand. I'm gonna have to watch the show again to understand. But I'm just saying, Draymond Green, there's no way he's scoring 9.5 points. Absolutely not. Draymond Green, no. Although he did last game, so I'll give him. Okay, I think that's enough. Those are my picks. These are the special NBA picks for today. We're gonna flex them. Gonna submit them. Simple as that. Download Prize Picks yourself. Use promo code COHN. Go away, spam. Use promo code COHN. Play $5, get $50 instantly in lineups when you use that promo code. All right. That was the show. Are there any more super chats? No. That was extremely educational. There is so much. I didn't realize there was so much research on this subject. What are you talking about, Jed and John? There's a lot to consider. And since you guys aren't going to do the research or do the reading, watch the show and consider moving your facility. Remember, you weren't there full time until 2004. You did training camp and OTAs elsewhere. Maybe this year, do OTAs in Stockton. Do it in Westwood. Do it in Australia. Don't do it next to, call it a science experiment. You guys can be the leaders in science. This year, we're going to do something different. We're going to move the facility and we're going to be healthy. What did he say? When we're healthy, we win the Super Bowl. All right, then be healthy. Move the facility. Spend some money. Show us that your number one concern isn't making as big of a profit as possible. Because if that's your number one concern, you're going to dismiss this and keep doing things exactly the same. And if people get hurt, they'll be like, oh, darn, what terrible luck. This is past the point of bad luck. It's been a decade. Looking at you, John and Jed. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll be back later today.